So Matthew, Mark, and Luke use blind men as kind of a way of contrasting the faithfulness of those who meet Jesus through their experience with the disciples who should know better, but are pretty blind, pretty stupid sometimes. In John, blind men are usually part of longer dialogues that say something about what kind of God it is that we worship. And this one starts right off with, well, the disciples see this man. He's obviously been born blind, been blind all of his life. He's probably sitting a few blocks from the pool of Siloam where people expected to be healed. And so they say, did he sin? Or did his parents sin? How come he was born blind? Now, how often have you heard that? If you grew up in Oklahoma, you've probably heard that a lot, or some similar version of it. I'm always amused when people say, well, New Orleans, it was hit by Katrina because of all the gay people and all the prostitutes and all the gambling. And then I remind them that all the gay people and the prostitutes and the gambling are in the French Quarter, which is the one place that wasn't hit. And then lots of tornadoes are hitting fundamentalist towns in Oklahoma, but they don't make the connection, or don't want to make the connection. It's so easy to say when something bad happens to somebody else, or even to ourselves, what did I do? What does God punish? Why is God punishing me? But that's not the God that Jesus worships. That is not the God that Jesus invites us to follow and listen to in any of the Gospels. Does our God punish? Certainly not in any way that we would understand. I can't imagine a God whose love is unending and tenacious, delighting in punishing somebody. What kind of God do we worship? If we look at this story with this man born blind, there's some fascinating things that happen. Immediately, that whole question of, does God do these things to people because they sin or their parents sin? Well, Jesus dispatched that one rather quickly. But then look at what happens. There's this dialogue that really focuses on the blind man, not on Jesus. Jesus sees him. Actually, I think the apostles saw him first, pointed him out to Jesus, and he responds to them, and then he makes the mud, puts it in the eyes of the blind man, and says, you need to get to the pool of Siloam and wash your face. No doubt somebody guided him along the way. And when it first happens, and he receives his sight, what does he say? When people ask, what happened to you? I could have sworn, aren't you the blind man? Or are you his evil twin? Well, he says, that man over there, the one they call Jesus, he put some mud in my face. And now I see. That's all I know. And in John, Jesus is always giving people sight, always providing light for people who are living in darkness. In fact, if there are two words that are the most repetitive words in the Gospel of John, they are light and love. Think about that. Or think about the first letter of John, where we are told over and over that God is love. It's something that we've learned from the time we were in first grade Sunday school, but we have a hard time believing it. Maybe more so the older we get, when people give us mixed messages about the gospel. But the challenge to